Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me in this seminar on the Bible prophecy timeline from creation to recreation. Today's segment is part 1 of 6. This seminar is the 4th in a series on prophetic timing. If you have not seen the previous 3, please stop and watch them first. The first seminar focused on dating the crucifixion and death of Jesus in AD 30. The second seminar focused on the operation of the Jubilee calendar, and the third seminar focused on the prophetic importance of 1798, 1844, and 1994. Because the topic of Bible prophecy is additive in nature, this seminar will build on the information presented in those earlier seminars. So I hope you have watched or will watch those seminars before proceeding with this one. Incidentally, if you would like to get a copy of the chart that you see behind me that we will be studying during this seminar, you can download it for free from our website at wakeup.org. Wake Up is hyphenated, so that's WAKE-UP.org. If you would like to order a chart, you can call our order desk at 1-800-475-0876. We will be happy to send you a color chart. They are not very expensive. I would like to begin this seminar with a short video clip taken from a seminar that I gave in 2014. That seminar can be found on YouTube, and it is titled Bible Prophecy for Beginners. I want to use this video clip because it offers a brief explanation about the architecture of apocalyptic prophecy. So please, take a few minutes and watch the following message that is taken from that seminar, and then we will jump into today's study. Apocalyptic prophecy speaks clearly. God's wrath is coming upon this world. The other night, I talked about something that God has hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. What was it? Oh, instant recall. Okay, God has, when the book of Daniel was written, God sealed it up until the time of the end, right? And when the book of Daniel is unsealed, what is the first thing that pops out of the book of Daniel that has been there all along for 2,600 years? But the book of Daniel, written in about the 6th century BC, what has been there for 2,600 years, and nobody during the past 2,600 years has seen it. Something was just hidden in plain sight. What was it? I told you the other night. Chronology. That's right. God hid the fact that there are 5 prophecies in Daniel, and each one of them is in chronological order. There's no exception. And the events within each prophecy are in chronological order. And the really cool thing about this is that they begin to line up with each other, and they create a matrix of prophetic progression. So the study of prophecy no longer becomes a nose of wax which people can manipulate to suit their religious bias or their religious convictions. Every church that has a prophetic position on the books of Daniel and Revelation always positions itself right at the very center of the story. Every church that has a position on the books of Daniel and Revelation always have a view of the prophecies that are favorable to their body of doctrine. Do you understand what I'm saying? They manipulate it to suit what they believe. But God hid in the book of Daniel a simple fact that undoes 2,600 years of prophetic thought and conclusion. Everything is in chronological order. And this is not only true for the 5 prophecies in Daniel, it's also true for the 12 prophecies in the book of Revelation. And so what is the end result? The end result is that we can take the 17 prophecies, we can put them on a timeline, we can look at their events, and we can begin to quickly see how things line up. And the good news is, and what's so clever about this simple little concept, this is time, we can see where the past is and we can see where the future will be. Because it's all chronological. It's not subject to negotiation. It's not subject to interpretation. It's not subject to religious bias. It's not subject to anything. It stands on its own 2 feet. This is what creates the more sure word of prophecy. And what's so cool about this is that once you understand how it works, you don't need Larry Wilson to tell you the story. You can sit down and figure it out for yourself. I'm going around trying to tell the story in order to accelerate your eagerness to know the story, but you don't need me. All you need to know is what was sealed up, and once you do, there you've got it yourself. And the Bible means just what it says, just as it reads. No manipulation, no external authority, nothing is required. I don't care what religion you are, chronological order is chronological order. How cool is that? God sealed up the book of Daniel until the time of the end because He has something to say to the whole world, the final generation at the time of the end. This is something He has not said at any other time, and nobody knew this. Hidden in plain sight for 26 centuries. How elegant, how simple. And rule 1 in understanding the books of Daniel and Revelation, that each prophecy has a beginning point, has an ending point, and the events occur just in the order that God Himself has declared. 1, 2, 3. A, B, C. Chronological order. Now, let me ask you a tough question. If God hasn't declared the chronological order of all these things, what authority will you turn to determine chronological order? Would you like to be it? Would you like to be able to tell the world, the whole world, all 7 billion people on the planet, what the order would be because you have greater authority than God? You've got to have greater authority than God in order to change the order of what He's declared. Think about that. And this, what I told you the other night, the number of books that have been written on Daniel and Revelation would fill this whole room over the past 2,000 years. All the books written would fill this whole room, even up to the ceiling. And they're all wrong. They're all wrong. Why? This wasn't known. This simple little truth was not known.
And once this truth becomes understood and known, it makes obsolete everything else. I have just drawn a crude map. Now, understand that this is not an attempt to show you precisely where the prophecies line up and how they line up. This is a concept piece. This is for simplicity, okay? What I want you to see is that in this example, prophecy 1, and that's what P1 stands for, prophecy 1, and prophecy 3, in this case, and you see a little blue guy there and a little red guy there. The red guy is John and the blue guy is Daniel. They are authors of one book, actually. They live 600 years apart. Daniel writes part of the book and John writes the rest of it. But it's actually one book, one story. And so what I'm trying to show you is that when you look at prophecy 1, you see a piece of prophecy 1 aligns with prophecy 8. And you see a piece of prophecy 3 lines with prophecy 10. Prophecy 5 lines up with prophecy 1. So what I'm trying to show you in a more graphic way is what I've illustrated here. Does that make sense to everyone? And this is only possible, listen carefully, this is only possible because of chronological order. Without chronological order, none of this will work. Without chronological order, we're back to the room full of books. Thousands of people have thousands of different ideas. Listen, if you're a mathematician, run this through your brain for a minute. Let's suppose there are about 120 prophetic pieces, 120 prophetic pieces in the books of Daniel and Revelation. How many possible arrangements can you put 120 pieces? It would be a number, 120 to the 120th power. That means 120 zeros following 120. That is how large all of this stuff gets when there's no chronological order. There is an infinite number of ways to arrange stuff and to move it around to your own personal taste. And that's called a private interpretation. And the world has been full of private interpretations, and books galore have been written on private interpretations that would fill this building, and they're all wrong, is what I'm trying to tell you. Because God hid in plain sight a simple but profoundly challenging truth. And that is, He declared the order. And there are 17 prophecies, and they're all in chronological order. And because they are, we can put them all together. We can create one story. And when we put them against the backdrop of the grand week, we talked about the grand week of 7,000 years last night. 1,000 the Wednesday, the Thursday, the Friday, and then, of course, the Sabbath, the coming millennium of the Revelation 20. So Daniel has 5, Revelation has 12. We have a total of 17 prophecies. And I have down at the bottom of this chart, for your consideration, I have a smaller little chart showing the operation of the Jubilee calendar right here. And this is where God uses the weekly cycles of the Jubilee calendar to measure time. And we will see that God gave the Jews 30 Jubilee cycles, and he gave the Gentiles 40 Jubilee cycles. And so during the time of the operation of the Jubilee calendar, a day equals a year. And that's how the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 equal 490 years. And that's how also the dark ages of Revelation 12 and Daniel 7 equal 1,260 years, a time times and half a time. But that's not germane so much right now. I'm just wanting you to see and understand that God's got a very simple process, and once you begin to work it, and once you begin to see how everything is in chronological order, lo and behold, everything is different. Everything else is wrong. And finally, Bible prophecy stands on its own 2 feet. This Bible prophecy doesn't mean what Larry Wilson says. You understand what I just said, don't you? It doesn't mean what I say. The best I can possibly do is give you a report on what I think it says. But it's not dependent upon me. It stands on its own 2 feet. And so I'm not here to give you my opinion about Bible prophecy. I'm here to tell you how God put it together and how it works and what some of the conclusions are, that what they have to be. And soon you can connect the dots for yourself. It's not a Larry Wilson story. It becomes your story coming out of your Bible. How good is that? It's the way it ought to be, don't you think?
Okay, now that you understand the basic idea that there are 5 prophecies in the book of Daniel, and there are 12 prophecies in the book of Revelation, and each one is in chronological order, this means that we can stack them on top of each other with respect to time. For example, let's go down and notice how that in Prophecy 3 and Prophecy 2 and Prophecy 1, we see 3 different elements in 3 different prophecies representing the same time period. In Prophecy 3, we have the ram. In Prophecy 2, we have the bear. And in Prophecy 1, we have the chest of silver. And we see that this represents the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, which existed from 538 to 331. So, because the prophecies are in chronological order, we can line them up, stack them on top of each other with respect to time, and we can see and measure the progression of time historically, and it all fits together with very perfect harmony. I want to take you to a point on the chart here as we start. I want you to understand that the books of Daniel and Revelation align 7 times. 7 times, Daniel and John discuss the very same event. For example, in the yellow markers, we're going to see Revelation, and in the Daniel markers, which are green, we will see how that Daniel and Revelation are pointing to each other 7 times. For example, the birth and ministry of Jesus, they both talk about. They both talk about the 1,260 years of persecution by the little horn power. They both talk about the cleansing of heaven's temple, the 3rd seal, the breaking open of the 3rd seal, the 2,300 days. They both talk about the physical appearing of Lucifer. They both talk about 10 future kings that will be ruling over the earth at the time of the second coming. They both talk about the second coming and, of course, the eternal kingdom. So we find in the books of Daniel and Revelation 7 alignments, 7 discussions of the same thing. And so when we go back to look at the big picture, we find that these markers, I don't know if you can see them. Let me expand this just a little bit closer in so that you can see here in the yellow, we have the book of Revelation. This is a marker, this is a marker, this is a marker. And then in Daniel, we have corresponding markers. You see the first 3 right here. This is where Daniel and John are describing the same thing. This chart is divided up into 6 segments, and I'd like to get you acquainted with those segments. It'll make it easier as we try to put these pieces together. Notice in the left-hand corner of the picture, we have the historical beginning with the 4 kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Grecia, and Rome. So that's segment 1, if you will. This is the footer that starts the first 5 prophecies which are given in the book of Daniel. Then we have this period of over 1,000 years, 1,260 years, of the Dark Ages. And both John and Daniel discuss and describe this time period. The next time period we have to be concerned with is the Great Tribulation. And Daniel describes it and tells us that it lasts 1,335 days. And then we have the time period of when the lamb-like beast, that is the physical appearing of the devil, or the horn power in Daniel 8. Both of these prophets, Daniel and John, describe this most amazing event because it has no historical parallel. Lucifer and his angels will be released from the spirit realm, from the abyss where they are now confined, and they will physically appear all over the earth. So we have this time period of the Great Tribulation. We have this time period of when the devil and his angels are physically upon the earth. And then we have the sabbatical millennium, the 7th millennium. And this time period, the 1,000 years in Revelation 20. And of course, we have at the end of that the creation of a new heaven and a new earth. So when we look at the big picture, and remember, we're going along chronologically. Down here at the bottom, this is the timeline. And we are stacking up various events on the timeline. And as we stack them up and as they become chronologically located, we then can put together quite a clear picture of what God's plan has been all along. And so let's go now and jump down to the bottom left, and let's look at these first 5 prophecies. As I said earlier in the Athens seminar, the little black box P1, P2, P3, P4, and so forth represent prophecy 1, prophecy 2, prophecy 3, etc. And in case you're wondering where you would find these prophecies, if you will go to the table of contents in my book, Jesus' Final Victory, you will see that each prophecy has its own chapter. Each prophecy has its starting place, has its ending point in time, and the verses that make up each prophecy are clearly enumerated in the table of contents right inside the cover of the book. So if you don't have the book, you can certainly download it for free on the internet, and you can see exactly where these 5 prophecies are. You can see where prophecy 10 and 11 are in the Bible, and you can see prophecy 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. You can see them all, exactly where they're located in Scripture. So when we are looking at this chart, what I want you to understand most of all is that we're really marking off and measuring the progression of time. And since this is in the past, this is all taken place in history, and it's easily verifiable. Then we come to the dividing line, if you will, and that's represented by this red arrow that you're seeing in the middle of the screen, and I'm calling this red arrow today. Today. This is where we are right now in 2015. And what are we waiting for? Well, we're waiting for, number one, the sealing of the selection and sealing of the 144,000. And then we're also waiting for the casting down of the censer. And we're waiting for the commencement of the 1,260 days given to the two witnesses. So prophecies 7, 8, and 9, we're waiting for them to suddenly begin. And of course, if you notice, here's the fourth seal. Let me move the screen just a little bit, because prophecy 6 began in 1798, and the first three seals have been broken open, and we're waiting for the next seal, which is the fourth seal. And when this seal is broken open, 25% of the population of Earth will die. Now, when this was printed, the population of Earth was 7 billion, and so 25% of 7 billion is 1.75 billion. This time period right here. This is amazing. This is what it's going to take for God to get man's attention. And of course, while this process of the fourth seal is about to begin, when God's wrath breaks out, which is what the fourth seal represents, then at this time, this is when the 144,000 will go to work. This is when the 1,260 days of the two witnesses will take place. And this is how the prophetic prophecies line up to tell us their story. Now, we have to properly line them up and link them all together, all 17, and they are not in conflict with each other. They all tell one story. Daniel has 5 prophecies, and John has 12 prophecies. And when you put them all together, there is one big story that perfectly fits. And generally speaking, looking at this chart, we could say that this is all in history, and this is all about to happen. And we know the course of events. We know their chronological order. We know the length and duration of each and its time, because we have stacked all the parts together, and there are 18 prophetic time periods embedded in these prophecies. And when we put the time periods together, if we do it properly, everything fits without any conflict. Now, I know that charts are hard to understand. And if you haven't seen this one before, I can understand why you would be confused in what I'm trying to illustrate here. But please get out my book, Jesus' Final Victory, or go to my website, and there you'll find it and download it for free. You need to study how the prophecies link up to each other. And I have drawn now another chart that looks like this. I'm going to take all of this information that you see on these 2 pages. I'm going to take all of this and put it in what I call the highway of time. I want to show you this chart, and I realize that on the screen that you're watching, this is a tremendous amount of information, all crammed on this one little chart. And so we're going to delete everything off the chart, And we're going to start back here at the time of creation, and we're going to come down through the four kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Grecia, and Rome. And then we're going to come through the Dark Ages, and then we're going to come around through World War I and World War II, and then we're going to come into the home stretch of the Great Tribulation, and of course the 1,000 years and a new earth. Well, this is a lot of detail, and I want you to understand that the information that I'm going to be using here has been taken right out of the previous chart that you saw, and I just took all of that information and put it on one chronological highway, starting from the creation of the earth to the recreation of the earth. And if we think of the chart this way, we start with just basically a very simple chart, and as we go along the highway, more details will be added and more discussion will be forthcoming as we discuss a variety of things that will come to pass. And they're all taken from this chart right here. So think of this chart as the skeleton, and think of this chart as the result when it's all fleshed out and put in one chronological order for everything. So with this in mind, let's take a look at this chart, and then we will continue in our next segment to expand it. Okay, let's start with this chart. God created the world in 6 days, and then he rested on the Sabbath day. And this in Genesis chapter 2, God made the Sabbath day holy. He set it apart as a day of rest. This is Adam and Eve's first day of life. Their first full day of life is God's Sabbath rest. This is important because we're going to see that this is a template that God is going to use many times throughout the duration of this world. God set this world up because he foreknew the existence of sin. He set this whole plan up and in motion at creation so that sin would last 6 millennial days, and the 1,000 years in Revelation 20 would be a Sabbath rest for the land. And of course, the saints will be able to enjoy the first 1,000 years of eternal life reigning with Christ. So this chart begins with creation because creation is the origin of life on earth. Creation explains our accountability to our Creator. Creation gives us purpose. It gives us destiny because this world and this life as we know it has an end, and there will be a new beginning following the completion of the sin problem. Okay, so that we move from creation, which in my estimation occurred in 4014 BC. Then we come down the highway a little bit, and we find that Noah's flood, according to my calculations, occurred in the year 2368 BC. And then, roughly 1,000 years later, the Exodus occurred in 1437 BC. The point that I'm alluding to here is that from the time of creation to the time of Daniel in Babylon is approximately 3,500 years. And so Babylonian captivity for Israel begins in 605 BC, and Nebuchadnezzar, of course, takes Israel into captivity after Israel has been a nation for approximately 800 years. So, chronologically, we have come from creation to the flood, from the flood to the Exodus, from the Exodus to the Babylonian captivity, and we've covered half of the 7,000 years allotted for sin, the duration of sin. And so we come down to the time of Babylon, and this is where we pick up in the prophecy, in Daniel 2. And the metal man, the head of gold, the chest of silver, the thighs of bronze. So we're marking off chronological order. And as we proceed, we're basically, God is just giving us a ruler, a yardstick, by which to measure the passage of time by defining these kingdoms. And then as we continue, we come down to the time of Rome. Rome began as an empire in 168 BC. You can see that up here at the top of the screen. And then we have the birth of Jesus. And you see the little baby there, joy to the world, Jesus is born. I conclude that Jesus was born around 4 BC. And I have this picture of the devil with a sword in his hand because he tries to kill baby Jesus through King Herod at the time of his birth. And you remember how Herod killed all the baby boys in Bethlehem that were 2 years of age and younger. But Jesus, the birth of Jesus, continues our progression. Christians were relentlessly persecuted until the time of Constantine. And Constantine, believed in Christianity. He marched his soldiers through the river to baptize them all. And he saw the wisdom that Christianity was a wonderful religion for unification. And then out of this time period, let's back up and get a little larger picture here. We then come into the Dark Ages, a time that is very difficult for the Christians who are opposed to the authority of the church at Rome. The Roman Catholic Church became dominant, and as a result, it overtook and ruled over Europe. It taught that salvation comes only through the church, and the church had control of the sacraments, and if you can't get the sacraments, you're doomed for destruction. Well, this period of time is often called the Dark Ages because the Bible was not promoted. Rather, the teachings of the church and the authority of the church was promoted. But right now, we're just marking time on the highway of Earth's history. And this brings us down to World War I in 1914. We come down to the Lateran Treaties in 1929. We'll see their importance later. We come over to World War II beginning in 1939. And then we come down to 1994 when the Jubilee calendar concluded. And now we're right here. We're waiting until the 144,000 are sealed and selected. And then we're going to have a host of events that will transpire over a period of 1,335 days called the Great Tribulation. And as, time goes by, we're going to look at these events, and we will discuss what that's all about. We will certainly investigate each one, but for now we just want to recognize that this is a time period that we're waiting for, and it's very short. Of course, this map is not drawn to scale. Then we come down to the time period of the 7 bowls, the 7 last plagues, and then, of course, the 1,000 years that occur, and then the earth is destroyed, and a new heaven and a new earth are created. And so that's why this chart is defined as creation to recreation. This highway is 7,000 miles, 7,000 years in length. Okay, well, that's the basic study that we're going to be looking at in this seminar. And with this introduction, we're out of time. I hope you've enjoyed your study today, and I hope you will bookmark this video and share it with your friends and proceed to the next segment.